Okay, so we've talked about mobile development in general, so now I want to get into PhoneGap, which is what this series is about. So what is PhoneGap? PhoneGap is a mobile web development framework that allows developers to build mobile applications that are written in HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS. PhoneGap applications are often called hybrid apps because they have native app properties and features but are actually written with web standards. Hybrid apps do not appear in a browser like most web apps. They appear to be native, and they can also access device resources as a native app would. So the camera, the phone contacts, geolocation, storage. It can basically access, it allows us to access all that stuff through HTML5 and JavaScript. And PhoneGap apps can be submitted to app stores, so they can go on the Apple Store or Google Play or the BlackBerry App Store. PhoneGap is open source and free. It was purchased by Adobe, and its official open source name is now Adobe Cordova, but it's still called PhoneGap. It's still known as PhoneGap. And PhoneGap will die someday. It's even stated in their documentation that sooner or later there'll be APIs where we can deal directly with the device's hardware, like the camera and all that, without using PhoneGap. Because right now PhoneGap is the middleman that allows us to do that. So PhoneGap will go away, and we'll have more native-like access. So platforms, as we talked about, one of the biggest pluses to PhoneGap, one of the biggest pros is that it's cross-compatible with any platform, whether it's an iPhone, Android, Windows Phone, BlackBerry, Bada, Symbian, WebOS, or Tizen, which I've never even heard of. You can build one app and it can function on all those platforms. So that's just an amazing thing right there. Alright, so let's take a look at how PhoneGap actually works. So we have our web app, which is built with HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and that goes into the PhoneGap framework, which will then add the native code for each device and spit out the application on iOS, Android, BlackBerry, whatever. And there's a few different ways to build PhoneGap apps. You can use an IDE like Eclipse, which has an Android plugin, or Xcode on a Mac. But the recommended way and the easiest way is to use the PhoneGap build service. So if you go to build.phonegap.com, basically you just upload your HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and a config file, and it spits out, it gives you the actual app to download, for instance the APK file for an Android. You do need an iOS developer's license to create iOS or iPhone apps with PhoneGap, which is, I think, $100 or $99 or something like that. BlackBerry, you do need a code, but I believe it's free. So Android is easily, you just put it into the PhoneGap build and you can download the APK, put it right on your phone, and that's it. So we'll be mostly dealing with Android through this whole course, just because it's very popular. Obviously it's free. There's no license or anything, so we can build them for free. So yeah, so let's go over some of the supported features. So these are features that normally would only be able to be accessed through a native app, but with PhoneGap we can use these features with HTML and JavaScript. So you can see we have the iPhones, the Android, BlackBerry, Windows Phone, and some of the less popular phones. The accelerometer can be used on all platforms. The camera can be used on all platforms. Compass, is not on the iPhone 3G, but it is on the 3GS and newer. It's not on the BlackBerry contacts, which allows us to access the phone's contacts. Is available on all platforms except WebOS. We have file, geolocation, media, network. We have the notification systems, which is the alert, the sounds, vibrations, and storage. We can use HTML5 local storage, or we can actually use a client database, which we'll be looking at. So you can see it pretty much does whatever a native app does. So PhoneGap Advantages, cross-platform is the biggest advantage. Built with web technologies, which are a lot easier to learn, or we have more developers that know web standards over Java and other languages. It runs like a native app. There's no visible browser, so there's no URL bar at the top or anything like that. It can have access to device resources like the camera and contacts, and we do that through special JavaScript APIs. Development methods. There are a few different ways to build a PhoneGap application. We can use the SDKs in an IDE like Eclipse, which has, for instance, an Android plugin with an emulator, but it's pretty difficult to do just to get the SDKs up and running and deal with the file structure. In command line, we could also do it through command line, which is also pretty complicated. The best way to do this is to use the PhoneGap's build service or platform, and this is actually recommended by PhoneGap. So pretty much we sign up on build.phonegap.com, and all we have to do is upload our HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, and then it'll give us a link to download the actual app for each platform. So some of the reasons to use PhoneGap: if your mobile app was already built using web technologies and you want to deploy it in the application store, in the Google Play or Apple Store, PhoneGap allows you to do that. If you want to build a mobile app leveraging your web development skills but need to leverage device-side features like camera, contacts, calendar, which aren't supported by mobile browsers, so PhoneGap can do that. If you want to build a quick prototype of a mobile application and don't have time to learn Java or Objective-C, PhoneGap is a really good thing to use. So device resources we can use through APIs. We've talked about this, but here's a more in-depth list. We can access the accelerometer, the camera, capture, compass, connection, contacts, device, events, file, geolocation, globalization, the in-app browser, media, notification system. We can also have splash screens and icons, and the storage system, which is the local storage, HTML5, or we can actually use a client-side database. So PhoneGap help and resources: obviously the website, the wiki, Google Groups, and the PhoneGap blog are all great resources. There's pretty good documentation, and each page, like for the camera API, it'll give you how it works, and it'll give you a working example as well, so it's really helpful. So that's it. What we'll do next is start to set up our environment, sign up for PhoneGap build service, and I believe we need a GitHub account as well to connect to the build service. So we'll be doing all that stuff, and we'll just get ready to start programming in the next section.